what are the things that led you to God? As you
Well, yeah, the first day we sat in the pastor, I'd never been to a church like this, any kind of evangelical church. And so I sat with my wife in this church and the pastor said Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And thought that was kind of a ridiculous claim, or at least I didn't think that was true. But I did go out and buy a Bible to see what he was reading. Why did he think this guy was so smart? So I went out and I got a Bible and I started to examine it. And one of the things that struck me, at least initially, was the differences in the gospel accounts. And I see a lot of this today where people will be online and they'll say, well, look, all you need to do is to compare this account to that account. Do you see how they're not the same? And they'll offer this as some kind of evidence that they're not reliable. Well, what struck me originally in my very first reading of the Gospels were those differences. Because if you've ever worked eyewitness statements, two eyewitnesses will never agree. They won't, and it frustrates you as a detective because you know that eventually, if I have to go to trial with these two witnesses, the defense team is going to point out that these two witnesses don't agree on certain issues and try to discredit them in front of a jury. And so, as a detective, we get a little frustrated with the fact that we always see these variations. But man, if you had like five witnesses, oh my gosh, the number of differences will be even more pronounced. So, but this is the nature of eyewitness claims. I'm always suspicious when every domino falls in and every claim is, and that was not the case with the Gospels. The Gospels have differences in the accounts. Sometimes those differences seem dramatic. And that is always the way it is with eyewitnesses, where you have multiple eyewitnesses. I don't care if the event occurred 2 hours ago. If I can lock everybody down and interview them separately, and that's what we like. As a matter of fact, when we get called out to a homicide scene, I'm at home and they call me to come in, I will typically ask the dispatcher to separate the eyewitnesses to preserve those differences. Because if you don't separate eyewitnesses, they'll start talking to each other, and then all of a sudden their stories all line up. And that means you're missing something. You're missing the nuanced differences. So as I was reading through the Gospels, I was like, wow, this has a level of variation that I would expect if these were actual eyewitnesses who, from their unique perspectives, both geographically, in terms of their culture, in terms of where they came from in their lives, what kinds of things interested them, what was their background coming into this. If I'm a fisherman, I probably notice different things than if I'm a doctor. I notice different things. If I'm a woman, I notice different things than if I'm a man. There are just different, if I'm interested in certain hobbies, I will notice certain things in those categories that I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. And you see this, and you'll see that when people give you a statement, they speak from their backgrounds, from their interests, from their unique cultural perspectives, and the accounts sound different. So the thing that some skeptics will throw at me today and say, hey, here's the problem, actually was the thing that I saw as credible. And what started my journey in investigating the Gospels was the fact that they did not all match. And that was one of the things that started me.
wow, that's so fascinating because usually the misconception is all eyewitnesses must agree with each other.
That's right. That's right. And that's something that you'll see. That's a very common mistake.
Yeah.
And it's a common mistake not just on the part of skeptics, but even Christians will sometimes develop theories in order to explain the differences between the Gospels. And I feel like saying, like, it's only because you've never consistently interviewed eyewitnesses that you think you need to develop a theory. And so even the Christians who are doing literary criticism will develop theories just because they're trying to reconcile differences between the Gospels. And there is just no reason to do that, because the reality of it is that's exactly what reliable eyewitness testimony looks like. And we have jury instructions. So if you're in a court trial here in America and you have a judge who is overseeing the trial, well, that judge will instruct the jury that differences between the accounts do not discredit the accounts, and that differences between the accounts do not mean you should automatically reject an account, because we see things differently and we notice limited things differently, and we also sometimes bring to our background to it. So that's something that we actually instruct jurors about.